Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We have a lot of material to cover and very little time, so I'm going to try to move fast. So let's go to the next slide. So one thing is that at the end, because there is so much material to cover, there will always be questions, and there always are, that are not, there's not enough time. So I created this mailing list which you can join, and then you can communicate with me directly. I will be providing information about different types of Islamic economics topics, including my book on the subject which is about to come out. And so this is just for anyone who wants to ask further questions, which will remain after this seminar. Okay, next. Next slide. All right, so how can we move to an Islamic economy? This is the question of the day. Next slide. So it seems that the government has withdrawn its objections, but this issue is very complex, much more than it appears on the surface, and I don't have sufficient time to clarify all of the issues. Okay, so next. Previous. No, next, yes. So, I'm going to summarize what needs, what the major conclusion is. First thing is that zero interest is just one small part of an Islamic economy. It's not that if we set interest to zero, we will achieve an Islamic economy. In fact, if we set interest to zero, the economy as it is will collapse. That doesn't mean that interest zero is not feasible, it's just that we need to make a lot of other changes. So, if we make those other changes, then the zero interest rate will emerge naturally as a consequence. So, alright, so next slide. Oh, I have a clicker. So, okay, good. So, I'm going to talk about politics, economics, Islamic economic system. So basically, what is the ideal that we want to move to, and then how can we move from our current capitalist system, which is highly un-Islamic, towards the Islamic system? What are the steps that need to be taken? So let me start with politics, which is really not my area. The federal Sharia court is powerless because anybody can take a pencil and paper and issue an objection, and then this has to be heard in the Supreme Court before the judgment is implemented. This is sort of the reverse of the natural system. Once the Federal Sharia Court takes a judgment, then it should be implemented. And sure, people can challenge it and go to the Supreme Court, but pending, then if they succeed in the Supreme Court, then they can reverse. So currently, even though the government has withdrawn its objections, governments are not the only objections, there are other objections. So it may be that this is just a political ploy. And those, but even more interesting is the fact that it may be worthwhile for those people who want Islamic system to let it go or to force it to go to the Supreme Court rather than having it pending. But these are issues that, because the current judgment has many gaps, and if the Supreme Court rules on it, it might be possible to fill up those gaps. Alright, so in political objectives, in terms of what we need to do, we need to stop this, we need to change this law, and I understand that there is already a motion in the Senate to change this law, that once the Federal Sharia Court takes a decision, it's implemented. Now, if somebody has an objection, he can file an objection, and if it succeeds, then it should be reversed. But for the moment, anyone can block any decision of federalism, and this certainly doesn't seem right. But also, we should actually, now that the objection is there, we should push for Supreme Court hearing early as possible, and then smooth out some of the wrinkles that need to be worked out in order to make this implement this in an effective way. All right, so some of the micro details which have been left out of this decision, although to some extent they have been covered. I don't have time to go into the ins and outs and the subtleties. But basically, in the Zia regime, what happened was that Islamization took place, but all they did was the banks just changed the names on their contracts and nothing else changed. Today, the Islamic banks are a little bit better off. They have actually made some progress, but there is no way that one can say, from the economics point of view, I'm talking as an economist, not as a Sharia expert, the Islamic banks and the conventional banks are performing exactly the same function when it comes to the economic aspect of it. And this is not how it should be, and I will explain what needs to be changed in order to get to a genuine Islamic system. So, but the main question is, who will decide that the Supreme Court decision has been implemented? Suppose we just say, this is something very easy to do, that okay, as soon as all of the banks become Islamic banks, then the decision has been implemented. There is no zero interest. So if this is done, then this will be basically more or less like what happened in the Zia regime, that the names have changed, but the Islam. So one of the things that needs to be done is to have really one very simple micro detail is that the Sharia boards should not be paid by the banks. This creates very adverse incentives. In fact, the board which decides that Islamization has taken place or not, on the macro level and also on the micro level, when there is a Sharia board for a bank, the decision should be made by someone who is not being paid by the bank. There are many ways and schemes to achieve this, but they are not yet in place. All right, so that's enough of politics. Let's go to the economics. Now, in other talks, I have explained how modern social science is a grand deception. It is based on the illusion that this social science is just like physical science. It's an objective, factual reality, and the law of supply and demand is like the law of gravity. But this is completely false. Actually, economics is a religion. It is a set of normative prescriptions about how you should run society. And these normative prescriptions are exactly adapted to a capitalist society, and they are completely wrong for an Islamic society. So, when we study economics, we will study it from an Islamic methodological perspective. And the methodological perspective is three-dimensional. It is based on saying that, okay, let's take a positive approach. What's going on? That's a description and an objective analysis. Then we also have a normative. What is the ideal? And then we have transformative. How do we get from where we stand to where we want to be? So these are the three components of an Islamic methodology, which I have labeled as ulumul Qur'an, because I say that we need to reject all of these Western social sciences. They are applicable only to European societies. They are not applicable to Islamic society. But this includes everything: business, economics, psychology, sociology, you name it, political science. They are all Western sciences. They were derived from lessons of European experience. They don't apply to us. So we start with the positive. Where do we stand? So to understand where we stand is a big problem. I mean, what is actually going on in the world around us? And the biggest problem in understanding what is going on is economic theory itself. It is designed to deceive us, and to hide the reality. So, for one example, one of the deceptive theories is the idea that money is a veil, or the quantity theory of money, as it's famously called. Because basically, what this theory says is that money only affects prices and has no other effect on the economy. This is completely wrong. And in fact, Keynes said in his revolutionary book that money is not neutral in the short run or the long run. But this idea was eventually rejected by economists led by the Chicago School, led by Milton Friedman. And today, all over the world, economists teach that money is neutral, and that's why they have no conception about how the global financial crisis happened, because that all have to do with money, which, according to economists, doesn't matter. All right, so 4 myths about money which are widely believed: that money is the sole cause of inflation. As Friedman said, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. This is completely false and bogus, and it's well known. Inflation occurs in Pakistan when oil prices rise. This has nothing to do with money. The second falsehood is that if the government creates money, this will lead to inflation. But if the government borrows the money, it will not lead to inflation. And this is nonsense, because when government borrows money, and this is something I learned from practical experience, what happens when the government borrows money? Well, the state bank creates money, lends it to the private banks at 16% today. The private banks turn around and lend it to the government at 16.5% or 17%. So they make money on this without any effort, and money creation takes place. So if government printing money, that is, the state bank creates money and gives it directly to the government instead of going through the private banks, it would be much cheaper and much better. But economic theory says that no, you can't do that. The third thing, which is even more revolutionary, is that government is not like a household. And this is a major myth, that government needs to raise money in order to spend it. Completely false. This is not true. The government gets to print money as much as it likes, and so it doesn't need to raise money. In fact, money is created. All money is created by the government. There is no other way to get money. So the government does not have to balance its budget. And so because of the second myth, that governments must raise money, today the governments are borrowing from foreign governments and borrowing from domestic sources and becoming strapped. Today. Nearly half of the budget, more than half of the budget of the government is in interest payments. It's completely ridiculous. There is no need for it. The government does not need to borrow from private sources, and it does not need to borrow from foreign sources. But economic theory tells us otherwise. And so our economists, because our ideas are also imported, we cannot manufacture our own, so we follow these theories which enslave us. So basically, the key point is that inflation is caused by increasing costs, not necessarily by money. Pumping money into the economy can also cause inflation. That's called demand pull. But the inflation that we see in Pakistan today, that's cost push. Cost push inflation does not come from money and cannot be managed by interest. So in the recent state bank statement, they said that we are raising interest rates to control inflation. That's also nonsense. The state bank cannot control inflation because the state bank has no control over what is happening to the oil prices. But nonetheless, what they did was correct. But the reason for that they described, that is, as a practical experience, tells me if they had not raised the interest rate, that would have caused serious problems for the economy. So they did the right thing, but the reasoning they explained for it was wrong. So a deeper question arises, a meta-level question. Why do economists maintain these theories when they are obviously wrong? Even a child can see that these theories are wrong, but economists insist on them, write textbooks on them, run policy with them. This is really very strange. I mean, have they no sense? Well, here, on the right-hand side, we have the description of how the GDP has grown in the USA over the past few decades. So from that picture, you don't see anything. Things are going normally. But actually what happened was that the Reagan-Thatcher revolution which took place, it wiped out the poor. In this right-hand graph, you see the share of wealth of the different proportions. So the small sliver of the light blue at the bottom, which basically disappears in the end, that is the share of the bottom 50% of the population. So the system, the financial system is designed to basically exploit the poor and give wealth to the rich. So it increases inequality. But when you look at the GNP statistics, you can't see anything like that. So to understand why Keynesian economics, the central point of Keynesian economics is that the government has the responsibility of creating full employment. As opposed to this monetarist Chicago school neoclassicals, they say that the market will automatically create full employment and the government should not interfere. So when Keynesian economics was applied following the Great Recession, the share of wealth of the top 1%, which is what this graph shows, started to decline. And actually, the era has been described about 30 years after the World War II, which ended in 1944. So let's say 44 to 74. This was the period of the maximum prosperity of USA and Europe, because Keynesian theories were in effect and governments were trying to create full employment, and so you can see that the share of the top 1% was declining. But this was very painful to the top 1%, so they plotted a counter-revolution, and this is described by Naomi, Klein. And so you can see that after the Reagan-Thatcher revolution, the share of the top 1% started to rise once again, and the bottom 50% got wiped out, as we saw in the previous graph. So there is this book called Naomi Klein, The Shock Doctrine, which explains all of this in great detail. And actually, I learned more economics from this book than I did from my PhD in Stanford. So basically, instead of going into the micro-level details, let me explain the big picture. The dominant economic theory has nothing to do with reality. It is just ideological support for the top 1%. It provides the justification for why the wealth should be unequal and why it should all go to those people who are already rich. Keynesian theories are far closer to the truth, and they provide for prosperity for the people because they insist on full employment. Alright, so that's so we can't understand what is happening in the macroeconomic level because the theories that are currently dominant